Abraham Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked toward his cabin. Another long day fixing fences under the Texas sun had left him bone-tired. At 52, he felt every ache in his weathered body. The prairie stretched endlessly around his small ranch, as empty and lonely as it had been for the past 10 years. He'd grown used to the silence. Hell, he'd even started to prefer it. That's when he heard the tiny voice. "Mister? Please, mister." Abraham stopped dead in his tracks. In all his years living alone out here, no one had ever just shown up at his door, especially not a child. He turned toward the sound and felt his heart skip a beat. Standing by his front porch was the smallest, most pitiful sight he'd ever seen. A little girl, couldn't be more than 8 years old, clutched a torn rag doll against her chest. Her dress was more holes than fabric, and dirt covered her from head to toe. But it was her eyes that hit him like a punch to the gut. Those big, hollow eyes held a kind of emptiness that no child should ever know. "Can I have just crumbs?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying on the evening breeze. "Just whatever you might throw away. I won't ask for more, I promise." Abraham's throat went dry. In all his years, through all the hardships he'd faced, nothing had ever broken his heart quite like those 6 words. This tiny girl, this baby, was begging for his table scraps. He opened his mouth to respond, but movement on the ridge caught his eye. 3 men on horseback sat watching from about 200 yards away. They weren't moving, just sitting there like vultures waiting for something to die. The little girl noticed his gaze and shrank back, pressing herself against his porch post. "Please don't let them take me back," she whimpered. "I'll be good. I won't eat much. I promise I won't eat much." Abraham's hands clenched into fists. Whatever was happening here, whatever had brought this child to his doorstep begging for scraps while grown men watched from the shadows, it made his blood boil. He looked down at the girl again, really looked at her this time. She was shaking, whether from fear or hunger or cold. He couldn't tell. Maybe all 3. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, keeping his voice as gentle as he could manage. "Sarah May," she said, clutching her doll tighter. "Sarah May Collins. But I ain't got no family no more. Mama and Papa died of the fever last winter. Been staying with different folks since then, but..." She trailed off, looking down at her bare feet. "But what, honey?" "They said I eat too much. Said I was stealing food from their own young-uns. But I wasn't stealing, mister. I was just so hungry." Tears started rolling down her dirty cheeks, leaving clean streaks in their wake. "Yesterday, they said I took a piece of bread without asking. I did take it, but I was so hungry my belly was hurting something fierce. Then those men came and said I owed money for all the food I ate, and if I couldn't pay, they'd find work for me to do until the debt was settled." Abraham's vision went red around the edges. He'd heard stories about men who preyed on orphan children, selling them to work in factories or worse places for pennies a day. The fact that they were using some made-up debt as an excuse made it even more disgusting. "How long since you've eaten, Sarah May?" She held up 3 small fingers. 3 days. Maybe 4. I lose count sometimes. That was it. Abraham had heard enough. He knelt down until he was eye level with the little girl. "Sarah May, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Do you see that door behind you?" She nodded. "I want you to go inside and sit at the kitchen table. There's bread in the pantry and some leftover stew on the stove. You eat as much as you want. You understand me? As much as you want." Her eyes went wide. "But I don't have no money to pay you. Did I ask for money?" She shook her head quickly. "Then you don't worry about money. You go eat, and I'll handle those men out there." Sarah May hesitated, looking between Abraham and the distant riders. "They're going to be awful mad if I don't come back with them." Abraham stood up to his full 6-foot height, his jaw set hard as stone. "Let them be mad. You're not going anywhere with them. Not now, not ever." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she scurried into the cabin like a frightened rabbit. Abraham waited until he heard the door close behind her, then turned his attention to the 3 men on the ridge. They'd started moving closer now, probably figuring it was time to collect their property. The man in front wore a black hat and had a nasty scar running from his left ear down to his collar. He was smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached his eyes. The other two flanked him like hunting dogs waiting for the command to attack. "Evening, Thompson," the scar man called out as they got within talking distance. "Name's Jeremiah Pike. We're here for the girl. She's not going anywhere with you." Pike's smile got wider. "Oh, but she is. See, little Sarah May there owes us quite a bit of money. Food costs, you understand. And since she can't pay, she'll work it off. Got a nice family up north needs help with their laundry. She'll learn real quick." Abraham stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the men and his cabin door. "She's 8 years old enough to work, old enough to pay her debts. The only debt around here is the one you boys are about to owe me if you don't turn around and ride out of here right now." Pike laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You threatening us, Thompson? Over some worthless little stray? Hell, you'd be doing her a favor letting us take her. What's a broke-down old rancher like you gonna do with a kid anyway?" Through the cabin window, Abraham could hear the soft sounds of Sarah May moving around his kitchen. The idea of those men dragging her away, of that sweet child working her fingers to the bone to pay off some imaginary debt, filled him with a rage he hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to give you boys one chance to leave," Abraham said, his voice deadly quiet. "Just one." Pike's hand moved to rest on his gun handle. "And if we don't," Abraham smiled then. It was every bit as cold as Pike's had been. "Then we'll find out just how broke down this old rancher really is." The three men exchanged glances. Whatever they saw in Abraham's eyes made them think twice about pushing the issue right then and there. "This ain't over, Thompson," Pike said, yanking his horse's reins. "We'll be back. Maybe with some legal papers next time. Maybe with more men. But we'll be back, and that girl will come with us." Abraham watched them ride away until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he allow his shoulders to relax. He turned back toward his cabin, where Sarah May was probably eating her first real meal in days. He had no idea how he was going to protect her from what was coming. All he knew was that he'd die before he let those bastards lay another finger on that child. Abraham stepped back into his cabin and stopped in his tracks. Sarah May sat at his kitchen table, but she wasn't eating. Instead, she was staring at the bowl of stew in front of her like it might disappear if she looked away. Her small hands were folded in her lap, and she was trembling. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Don't you like stew?" "I do," she whispered. Is it really okay? You won't change your mind." Abraham felt something crack inside his chest. How many times had this little girl been promised food, only to have it taken away? How many cruel tricks had she endured from adults who should have protected her? "Sarah May, look at me." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "That food is yours. I cooked it for someone to eat, and right now, that someone is you. Nobody's going to take it away. Nobody's going to punish you for eating it. You understand?" She nodded quickly, then picked up the spoon with shaking hands. The first bite made her eyes close tight, and a soft whimper escaped her throat. Abraham watched as she ate slowly, savoring every single bite like it was the finest meal she'd ever tasted. Hell, it probably was. When she finished the stew, he cut her a thick slice of bread and spread butter on it. Her eyes went wide again. Butter too. Butter too. She ate 3 more slices after that, and Abraham found himself smiling for the first time in months. When she finally pushed back from the table, her small belly was slightly rounded, and she looked sleepy. "Thank you, mister. That was the best meal I ever had. You can call me Abraham, or Mr. Thompson if that feels more proper." "Abraham," she repeated, like she was trying out the name. "That's a nice name. Like Abraham Lincoln." "That's right. Your mama teach you about President Lincoln?" Sarah May's face lit up. "She did. She said he freed the slaves and was a good man. She taught me to read some too before she got sick." Abraham felt another piece of his heart break off. This child had been loved once. She'd had parents who cared about her education, who taught her right from wrong. And now she was alone in the world, being hunted by men who saw her as nothing more than free labor. I'll bet she was proud of you. Tears filled Sarah May's eyes. She was. She used to say I was her little scholar. But then the fever came, and she wiped her nose with the back of her hand. I miss her something awful. Abraham reached across the table and gently took her small hand in his large, calloused one. Tell me about her. For the next hour, Sarah May told him stories about her parents. Her father had been a blacksmith, strong and kind, who used to carry her on his shoulders. Her mother had sung lullabies and made the best apple pie in 3 counties. They'd lived in a small house with a garden where her mother grew flowers just because they were pretty. As she talked, Abraham found himself thinking about his own daughter, Emma. She'd been about Sarah May's age when the influenza took her and his wife, Mary. That had been 10 years ago, and he'd spent every day since trying not to remember the sound of Emma's laugh or the way she used to braid flowers in her mother's hair. Abraham. Sarah May's voice pulled him back to the present. Are you sad? Why do you ask that, honey? You got tears in your eyes. He wiped them away quickly, just thinking about some old memories. Nothing for you to worry about. Sarah May yawned, and Abraham realized how late it was getting. The sun had set while they'd been talking, and she could barely keep her eyes open. You look tired, sweetheart. Let me show you where you can sleep. He led her to the small back room he'd used for storage. It wasn't much, but there was a narrow bed and a window that let in the moonlight. He pulled some clean blankets from the closet and made up the bed while she watched. This is all for me. All for you. And Sarah May? That door locks from the inside. If you get scared in the night, you just turn that little latch there, and nobody can get in. Okay. She nodded and climbed onto the bed, still clutching her torn rag doll. Abraham was about to leave when her small voice stopped him. Abraham, will you tell me a story? Mama used to tell me stories before bed. He sat down on the edge of the bed, tried to remember the last time he'd told a bedtime story. It had been to Emma the night before she got sick. Once upon a time, he began, there was a little girl who lived on a farm with her papa. She had the prettiest laugh you ever heard, and she loved to pick wildflowers. As he told the story, he found himself talking about Emma without meaning to, about how she'd chase butterflies and help her mother bake cookies, about how she'd sing to the chickens and try to teach the barn cats to dance. Sarah May's eyes grew heavy, but she smiled at all the right parts. When he finished, she was nearly asleep. That little girl sounds nice, she whispered. What happened to her? Abraham's throat tightened. She had to go away. But her papa never forgot how much he loved her. Do you think she knew that her papa loved her? Yes, sweetheart. I think she knew. Sarah May was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she asked, Abraham, do you think you could maybe love me too? Just a little bit. The question hit him like a physical blow. This broken little girl, who'd been abandoned and mistreated and chased by monsters, was asking if he could find it in his heart to care about her, as if she wasn't already the most precious thing he'd seen in 10 years. Sarah May, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I already do. Her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Abraham tucked the blankets around her and was about to leave when she grabbed his hand. Are you going to be my papa now? The words hung in the air between them. Abraham looked down at this tiny girl who'd stumbled into his life just hours ago, who'd already turned his empty world upside down. A few hours ago, he'd been a lonely old man counting down his days. Now he was looking at a child who needed him, who saw something in him worth loving. Would you like that? He asked. She nodded so hard her whole body moved. Then yes, sweetheart, I'll be your papa. Just as she drifted off to sleep, Abraham heard the distant sound of horses. His blood ran cold. Pike and his men were back, just like they promised. But this time, they weren't alone. Through the window, he could see at least 5 riders on the ridge. Abraham quietly closed Sarah May's door and checked the latch. Then he went to his gun cabinet and began loading his rifle. Those bastards wanted to fight? They'd get one. But first, he had a little girl to protect. Abraham spent the long night hours moving quietly around his cabin, checking every window and door. He pushed his heavy oak table against the front door and made sure all the shutters were latched tight. Through the gaps in the wood, he could see the flickering light of a campfire on the ridge. Pike and his men weren't hiding anymore. They were letting him know they were there, waiting. As the first gray light of dawn crept across the prairie, Abraham heard Sarah mace stirring in her room. He quickly put his rifle aside and started making coffee, trying to act normal. The last thing he wanted was to scare her more than she already was. "Morning, Papa Abraham," she said softly as she padded into the kitchen in her bare feet. The word Papa hit him right in the chest, but he managed to smile. "Morning, sweetheart. You sleep okay?" She nodded, but he could see the worry in her eyes. "I heard noises in the night. Are those bad men still out there?" Abraham knelt down to her level. There was no point in lying to her. Kids were smarter than most adults gave them credit for, and Sarah May had already seen too much of the world's cruelty to believe in fairy tales. "Yes, they're still out there. But I want you to remember what I told you last night. Nobody's going to hurt you. Not while I'm breathing. But there's more of them now, isn't there? Sharp as a tack, this one." "There are. But that doesn't change anything. You're safe here with me." Sarah May moved closer and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "I'm not scared," she whispered. "Not if you're here." Abraham held her tight, breathing in the smell of her hair. In less than 24 hours, this little girl had become more important to him than his own life. The thought of those animals outside, wanting to drag her away, made his vision go red around the edges. They ate breakfast together, eggs and bacon that Abraham cooked while keeping one eye on the windows. Sarah May ate slowly, savoring every bite like she still couldn't quite believe the food was real. Every few minutes, she'd look up at him and smile, and each time it nearly broke his heart all over again. Around 8 in the morning, they heard horses approaching. Abraham immediately stood up, rifle in hand. "Sarah May, I want you to go to your room and get into the bed. You remember what we talked about? Lock that door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Her eyes went wide with fear, but she nodded and scurried toward her room. Abraham waited until he heard the latch click, then moved to the front window. Pike sat on his horse about 50 yards from the cabin, but he wasn't alone. 4 other men flanked him, and one of them wore a tin star on his vest. A corrupt sheriff's deputy, no doubt bought and paid for. They were all armed and looking confident. "Thompson," Pike called out, "we've come to collect what's ours. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Abraham cracked the shutter open just enough to show his rifle barrel. "I told you yesterday. She's not going anywhere with you." "See, that's where you're wrong." Pike held up a piece of paper. "Got myself some legal documents here. Says the girl owes a debt, and we're authorized to collect. So you can hand her over nice and peaceful, or we can come in and get her. Your choice." "Let me see those papers." Pike laughed. "You calling me a liar, Thompson? I'm calling you exactly what you are. A piece of trash who preys on children." The deputy spoke up then, his voice carrying the authority of his badge, even if it was crooked. "This is official business, Thompson. Interfering with a legal debt collection is a crime. You don't want to add obstruction to whatever charges might come your way." Abraham had seen men like this deputy before. They hid behind their badges while doing the devil's work, thinking a piece of tin gave them the right to destroy innocent lives. It made him sick. "Here's what I think of your legal papers," Abraham said. He kicked open the front door and stepped onto his porch, rifle aimed directly at Pike's chest. With his free hand, he reached out. "Hand them over." Pike hesitated, then rode closer and tossed the papers at Abraham's feet. Abraham picked them up without taking his eyes off the men. One quick glance told him everything he needed to know. The writing was sloppy, the signatures were obviously forged, and the whole thing looked like it had been written on someone's kitchen table the night before. Abraham tore the papers in half and let the pieces scatter in the wind. "Those papers ain't worth the ink they're printed with. Now get off my land." Pike's face went dark red with anger. "You just made a big mistake, Thompson. Boys, spread out." The 5 men began to circle the cabin like wolves surrounding a wounded deer. Abraham backed toward his door, but kept his rifle trained on Pike. Last warning, Abraham said, "Leave now or I start shooting." "You won't shoot a lawman," the deputy called out. "Try me." Something in Abraham's voice must have gotten through to them because they all stopped moving. But they didn't leave. Instead, they positioned themselves around the cabin where they could watch every window and door. Abraham slammed his door shut and barricaded it again. Through the walls, he could hear them talking and laughing. They were planning something, and it wasn't going to be pleasant. From her room, he heard Sarah May's muffled voice. "Papa Abraham, what's happening?" "Just some men who don't want to quit," he called back. "You stay right where you are, sweetheart." The next few hours were the longest of Abraham's life. The men outside took turns calling out threats and insults. They talked loud enough for Sarah May to hear, describing all the terrible things they planned to do to her once they got their hands on her. They laughed about how she'd cry and beg, how she'd learn real quick what happened to children who didn't pay their debts. Each word made Abraham's anger burn hotter. These weren't just criminals. They were monsters who took pleasure in terrorizing a child. And they seemed to think they could break his will by making her suffer. Around noon, one of them started tapping on Sarah May's bedroom window with the barrel of his gun. Tap, 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 over and over again, like a woodpecker made of steel and cruelty. "Little girl," the man sang out in a mockingly sweet voice, "we can see your shadow moving around in there. Why don't you come out and play? We've got such fun games planned for you." That's when Abraham heard it. A small, frightened whimper from Sarah May's room. Something inside him snapped. Abraham threw open his front door and stepped onto the porch, his rifle already aimed and ready. "Get away from that window," he roared. "Right now." The man at the window looked up with a startled expression. He'd been so busy terrorizing a child that he'd forgotten about her protector. "Or what, old man?" Abraham's shot rang out across the prairie. The bullet splintered the wood inches from the man's head, and he dove away from the window with a yelp of fear. "Next one goes center mass," Abraham called out. "Test me if you want." Pike stood up from where he'd been crouched behind a water trough. "You're making this real, personal, Thompson. It was personal the minute you started scaring that little girl. She's 8 years old, you bastard. 8 years old. Old enough to work. Old enough to pay what she owes. She doesn't owe you anything. And even if she did, I'd pay it myself before I'd let you touch her." Pike laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, you'll pay all right. Question is, will you pay with money or blood?" Abraham chambered another round. "Your choice." The standoff continued as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The men outside grew bolder as the hours passed, creeping closer to the cabin, testing Abraham's resolve. They seemed to think they could wear him down, that eventually his nerve would break and he'd hand over Sarah May to save his own skin. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Around 4 in the afternoon, Sarah May's voice came through her door, small and scared. "Papa Abraham, I have to use the outhouse." Abraham's heart sank. The outhouse was 20 yards behind the cabin. 20 yards of open ground where Pike's men could grab her. "Can you wait a little longer, sweetheart?" I don't think so." Abraham closed his eyes and made a decision that would change everything. If those men wanted a war, he'd give them one. But first, he had to make sure Sarah May was safe. "Sarah May, I need you to listen very carefully. We're going to go outside together, and I'm going to make sure you get to the outhouse safely. But when we come back, things might get loud. Real loud. Do you understand?" "Yes, Papa Abraham." "Good girl. Unlock your door." Abraham took a deep breath and checked his ammunition. 5 men against 1. Not great odds, but he'd faced worse. The difference this time was that he had something worth fighting for. "All right, sweetheart," he called out. "Let's go." As he opened the door and stepped into the afternoon sun with Sarah May close behind him, Abraham knew there was no going back. This was it. Win or lose, live or die, those men were not leaving with his little girl. The final battle was about to begin. Abraham stepped onto the porch with Sarah, May pressed close to his side, his rifle ready. The 5 men had positioned themselves around the cabin like hungry wolves, and he could see the excitement in their eyes. They thought they finally had him cornered. "Easy now, Thompson," Pike called out from behind the water trough. "Just let the girl walk over here, nice and slow. Nobody has to get hurt." "Like hell," Abraham growled. He kept Sarah, May behind him as they moved toward the outhouse. "You boys stay right where you are." They made it halfway across the yard when the deputy decided to make his move. He sprang up from behind a pile of firewood, reaching for Sarah May. "Got you, you little." Abraham's rifle cracked like thunder. The deputy spun around and hit the ground hard, clutching his shoulder and screaming. Blood seeped between his fingers as he writhed in the dirt. "Papa Abraham!" Sarah May shrieked, grabbing onto his belt. All hell broke loose. Pike's men opened fire from their positions, bullets whining past Abraham's head and splintering the cabin walls behind him. Abraham shoved Sarah May toward the outhouse. "Get inside and lock the door," he yelled over the gunfire. "Don't come out no matter what you hear." Sarah May ran as fast as her little legs could carry her. Abraham heard the outhouse door slam just as a bullet burned across his shoulder, tearing through his shirt and leaving a line of fire across his skin. He dove behind his woodpile and started shooting back. The first man he saw was crouched behind his own porch, reloading. Abraham put a bullet center mass, and the man dropped without a sound. That left 3, plus the wounded deputy who was still moaning and bleeding. "You killed my brother, you bastard," one of the remaining men shouted. He stood up to get a better shot and immediately regretted it. Abraham's next bullet caught him in the chest, spinning him around before he collapsed face first in the dirt. Pike was screaming orders now, his voice high and panicked. "Circle around. Get behind him. You can't watch all directions at once." But Abraham had spent 10 years alone on this ranch, and he knew every rock, every dip in the ground, every bit of cover within 100 yards. These men were used to terrorizing helpless children and unarmed farmers. They'd never faced someone who fought back with the fury of a man protecting his family. The third gunman tried to flank Abraham from the left, creeping along the fence line. Abraham waited until he was in the open, then put him down with a single shot. The man fell backward into the horse trough with a splash, and the water slowly turned red. That left just Pike and the wounded deputy. "This is over, Pike," Abraham called out. "Your men are dead. Ride away now, and I won't come after you." Pike's laugh was wild and desperate. "Over? Hell no, it ain't over. That little girl is worth more money than you can imagine, Thompson. There's men who pay good coin for young ones like her. Real good coin." Abraham's blood turned to ice. He'd suspected Pike was planning to sell Sarah May, but hearing it said out loud made him see red. These weren't just cruel men looking to make a child work off a fake debt. There was something much worse. "You're a dead man, Pike." "Maybe, but I ain't going alone." Pike made his desperate play. He sprinted across the open ground toward the outhouse, firing his pistol wildly as he ran. Most of his shots went wide, but one bullet punched through Abraham's left thigh, sending him to one knee. Abraham gritted his teeth against the pain and took careful aim. His shot took Pike high in the chest, but the bastard didn't go down. He staggered, blood soaking his shirt, but kept moving toward the outhouse where Sarah May was hiding. "Can't stop me now, old man," Pike gasped, raising his gun toward the outhouse door. "If I can't have her, nobody can." Abraham tried to stand, but his wounded leg buckled. He could hear Sarah May crying inside the outhouse, terrified by all the gunfire. Pike was only 10 feet from the door now, his gun aimed and ready. With a roar of pure fury, Abraham threw himself forward. His legs screamed in agony, but he managed to tackle Pike around the waist just as the man's gun went off. The bullet splintered the outhouse door inches from where Sarah May was cowering. The 2 men rolled in the dirt, wrestling for Pike's gun. Abraham was bigger and stronger, but he was also bleeding from 2 wounds and Pike was fighting with the desperate strength of a man who knew he was about to die. Pike managed to get on top and pressed his gun against Abraham's throat. Should have minded your own business, Thompson. Now you get to watch what happens to your little girl before I put a bullet in your brain. Abraham looked up at Pike's twisted, blood-streaked face and smiled. Look down, you son of a bitch. Pike glanced down and saw Abraham's knife buried hilt deep in his stomach. Abraham had pulled it from his boot during their struggle, and Pike had been too focused on his gun to notice. That's for Sarah May, Abraham whispered. Pike's eyes went wide with shock and pain. He tried to say something, but blood filled his mouth instead of words. He toppled sideways and lay still. Abraham struggled to his feet, both legs shaking from blood loss and exhaustion. The wounded deputy was trying to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Deputy, Abraham called out. The man looked back with terrified eyes. If I ever see you within 100 miles of here, I'll finish what I started. Are we clear? The deputy nodded frantically and kept crawling toward the horses. Abraham limped over to the outhouse and tapped gently on the door. Sarah May? Sweetheart, it's over. You can come out now. The door cracked open, and one frightened I peeked out. When she saw Abraham standing there, alive and smiling despite his wounds, she burst out of the outhouse and threw herself into his arms. Papa Abraham, I was so scared. I thought they were going to hurt you. Abraham hugged her tight, feeling her small body shake with sobs. It's okay, baby girl. It's all over. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again. As he held her, Abraham looked around at the bodies scattered across his yard. 5 men had come to take his little girl away. 4 were dead, and the 5th would be lucky to make it to the next town. But Sarah May was safe. That's all that mattered. 3 days after the gunfight, Abraham lay in his bed watching Sarah May carefully change the bandage on his leg wound. Her small fingers were gentle but sure, and she hummed softly while she worked. It was the same lullaby she'd said her mama used to sing to her. There you go, Papa Abraham, she said, patting the fresh bandage. All better. Abraham smiled down at her. The bullet had gone clean through his thigh, and while it hurt like blazes, it was healing well. His shoulder was already feeling much better. But the real healing had been watching Sarah May come alive over the past few days. She'd barely left his side since the shooting. When he was too weak to get up, she'd brought him water and soup. When fever made him delirious in the night, she'd sat by his bed and held his hand until the sweats passed. It was like having his own little nurse, determined to take care of him the way he'd taken care of her. You're getting real good at this doctoring business, Abraham told her. Sarah May beamed with pride. Mama taught me some when Papa got hurt at the blacksmith shop. She said taking care of people was one of the most important things a person could do. Your mama was a wise woman. She was. Sarah May climbed up on the bed and curled up next to Abraham, careful not to jostle his injured leg. Papa Abraham, what is it, sweetheart? Those men, they're really not coming back, are they? Abraham wrapped his good arm around her small shoulders. No, baby girl, they're never coming back. I promise you that. She was quiet for a moment, then looked up at him with those big, serious eyes. Did you have to kill them? Abraham had been dreading this question, but he knew it would come eventually. Sarah May was too smart to pretend the violence hadn't happened, and she deserved an honest answer. I did what I had to do to keep you safe, he said carefully. Those weren't good men, Sarah May. They wanted to hurt you, and I couldn't let that happen. Because you love me? Because I love you more than my own life. She hugged him tighter. I love you too, Papa Abraham, more than anything in the whole world. The sound of horses approaching made them both look toward the window. But these weren't the threatening riders they'd grown to fear. A single man rode up to the cabin, and he had a real sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Stay here, sweetheart, Abraham said, slowly getting to his feet. His leg protested, but he could walk if he was careful. He grabbed his rifle and limped to the front door. You Abraham Thompson? The sheriff called out. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, nothing like the corrupt deputy who'd ridden with Pike. I am. You hear about the shooting. Named Sheriff Watson from Cedar Falls. Got word there was some trouble out here. Mind if I come in and talk?" Abraham studied the man carefully. Everything about him seemed genuine, from his weathered face to the way he sat easy in his saddle. "Come ahead, but keep your hands where I can see them." Sheriff Watson dismounted and walked slowly toward the porch, his hands well away from his gun. "I understand your caution, Mr. Thompson. After what happened here, I reckon I'd be suspicious of any badge." Abraham opened the door wider. "Come on in. Can I get you some coffee?" "That'd be appreciated." As Abraham poured coffee, Sarah May peeked out from the bedroom doorway. Sheriff Watson's expression softened when he saw her. "This must be the little miss all the fuss was about," he said gently. "Hello there, sweetheart. I'm Sheriff Watson." Sarah May looked at Abraham, who nodded encouragingly. She stepped into the kitchen but stayed close to Abraham's side. "Hello," she said quietly. "Sarah May, why don't you show Sheriff Watson how good you've gotten at making biscuits?" Abraham suggested. "I'll bet he's hungry after his long ride." As Sarah May busied herself at the stove, clearly proud to help, Sheriff Watson turned to Abraham. "I tracked that wounded deputy for 2 counties before he collapsed at Doc Miller's place in Haskell. Took 3 days to get the truth out of him, but he finally talked." Abraham tensed. "And turns out Jeremiah Pike and his boys have been running this same scheme for near 2 years. Taking in orphan kids, claiming they owe debts for food and shelter, then selling them to work gangs up north. We found records of at least 12 children they trafficked." Abraham's jaw tightened. "How many of those children got rescued?" "We're working on that. The deputy gave us names and locations. It's going to take time, but we'll get them back." Sheriff Watson accepted a cup of coffee from Sarah May with a grateful nod. "These biscuits smell wonderful, miss." Sarah May smiled shyly. "Papa Abraham taught me his mama's recipe." The sheriff looked between them, understanding passing across his face. "I see. Mr. Thompson, I need to ask some questions about the shooting. But first, let me be clear about something. From everything I've learned, you were protecting this child from kidnappers and traffickers. As far as the law is concerned, you did exactly what any decent man would do." Relief flooded through Abraham. "So there won't be any charges?" "Not against you. Pike and his men were wanted in 3 counties for child trafficking. You did the world a favor." Sheriff Watson pulled some papers from his saddlebag. "Now about the girl. I understand she doesn't have any living relatives?" Abraham's protective instincts flared. "She belongs with me now. I believe you, Mr. Thompson, but we need to make it legal. Proper adoption papers, so nobody can ever question her place with you. I've got the forms right here if you're willing." Abraham looked at Sarah May, who was hanging on every word. "What do you think, sweetheart? Want to be a Thompson official like?" Sarah May's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it. If you'll have me as your papa." She threw her arms around his waist, nearly knocking him over despite his wounded leg. "Yes. Yes, yes, yes." Sheriff Watson smiled as he spread the papers on the kitchen table. "Well then, let's make it official. Sarah May Thompson has a nice ring to it." As Abraham signed the adoption papers with Sarah May pressed against his side, he realized that in trying to save her, she'd actually saved him. For 10 years, he'd been just existing, going through the motions of living without any real purpose. Now he had everything that mattered. 2 hours later, after Sheriff Watson had ridden away with promises to check on them regularly, Abraham and Sarah May sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was curled up in his lap, sleepy and content. "Papa Abraham, what is it, baby girl? Are we a real family now?" Abraham hugged her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "We're the realest family there ever was, Sarah May Thompson." She smiled and closed her eyes, safe and loved at last. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had each other. And that was more than enough. 1 year later, Abraham stood in his kitchen watching Sarah May set the table for Sunday dinner. The same kitchen where she'd first asked for crumbs now smelled of roast beef and fresh baked bread. Wildflowers she'd picked that morning sat in a mason jar in the center of the table, and her drawings covered the walls like colorful wallpaper. The cabin itself had been transformed. What was once a lonely bachelor's home was now clearly a place where a family lived. Pink gingham curtains hung in the windows. A small bookshelf held the school books Abraham had ordered from back east. Sarah May's clothes hung on wooden pegs next to his own, and toys were scattered in corners throughout the house. But the biggest transformation wasn't in the cabin. It was in Abraham himself. The hard lines around his eyes had softened. He smiled more in a single day now than he had in the previous 10 years combined. His hair was still gray, but it was neatly trimmed now. Sarah May had insisted on that. She'd also insisted he needed a proper Sunday shirt, which he was wearing today, despite his grumbling about being too dressed up for a regular dinner. "Papa Abraham, is the roast ready yet?" Sarah May called from the dining room. At 9 years old, she'd grown 3 inches and gained 15 pounds of healthy weight. Her cheeks were rosy, her hair shone with cleanliness, and her dresses were new and properly fitted. But more than her physical transformation, it was the light in her eyes that showed how much her life had changed. "Just about, sweetheart. Why don't you call our guests to the table?" Their guests were Martha and Henry Collins, the elderly couple who'd moved to the neighboring ranch 6 months ago. They'd become like grandparents to Sarah May, and Abraham valued their friendship more than he could say. It had taken him most of his life to learn how good it felt to be part of a community. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins, Papa Abraham says dinner's ready," Sarah May announced. The couple emerged from the parlor where they'd been admiring Sarah May's latest artwork, a drawing of their little family standing in front of the cabin, all of them smiling under a bright yellow sun. "That roast smells incredible, Abraham," Martha said, taking her seat. She was a plump woman with kind eyes who'd taken one look at Sarah May and declared her the sweetest child in 3 counties. "Our Sarah May helped with the vegetables," Abraham said proudly, carrying the platter to the table. "She's getting to be quite the little cook." Sarah May beamed at the praise. "Papa Abraham taught me everything. He says a person should know how to take care of themselves and others." As they all took their seats around the table, Abraham looked at the scene before him and had to swallow hard against the emotion rising in his throat. A year ago, he'd eaten every meal alone, usually standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the empty table felt too lonely. Now his table was full of laughter and conversation, and he couldn't imagine it any other way. "Shall we say grace?" Martha suggested. They all joined hands, and Abraham felt Sarah May's small fingers squeeze as tight. "Heavenly Father," he began, his voice steady but thick with feeling, "we thank you for this food, for this home, and for bringing us all together as family. We're grateful for every blessing, especially the greatest blessing of all." He looked at Sarah May. "The gift of love." "Amen," they all said together. As they passed dishes around the table, Henry told stories about his days as a cattle driver, and Martha shared gossip from town. Sarah May listened with wide eyes, occasionally adding her own observations that made the adults laugh. The conversation flowed as easily as water, comfortable and warm. When they'd finished the main course, Abraham brought out Sarah May's favorite dessert, apple pie with fresh cream. "Papa Abraham makes the best pie in Texas," Sarah May announced loyally. "Well, I don't know about that," Abraham said, cutting generous slices. "But I reckon it's good enough." "It's perfect," Sarah May declared. Then, looking up at him with those bright eyes, she asked, "Papa Abraham, can I have more potatoes with my pie?" Abraham paused, the serving spoon halfway to her plate. For just a moment, he heard the echo of another question from another time. "Can I have just crumbs?" The contrast between then and now hit him like a physical blow. This healthy, happy child asking for more food, not begging for scraps, but simply wanting seconds of a meal she knew was freely given. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "you can have anything your heart desires. Always." Sarah May tilted her head, studying his face with the intuition children sometimes possess. "Papa Abraham, are you sad?" "No, baby girl. I'm the opposite of sad. I'm grateful." "For what?" Abraham set down the spoon and looked around the table at Martha and Henry's smiling faces, at the warm kitchen filled with love and laughter, and finally at Sarah May herself, his daughter in every way that mattered. "For everything," he said, "but mostly for you." Sarah May's response came without hesitation, spoken with the absolute certainty that only a loved child can possess. "I already have everything I want too, Papa Abraham. I have you." As the words hung in the air, Abraham felt the last broken piece of his heart finally heal. He'd spent 10 years convinced his life was over, that love and family were things that belonged to his past. He'd been wrong. Sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as the hardest challenges. A year ago, a starving little girl had stumbled into his life asking for crumbs. In saving her, he discovered something he thought was lost forever: the joy of being needed, of being loved, of being someone's whole world. They were a family now, complete and unbreakable. And every day forward would be better than the last, because they'd face it together. After dinner, as Sarah May helped clear the table, she started humming the same lullaby her mother had once sung to her. But now it wasn't a song of sadness or longing. It was a song of contentment, of home, of love that would last a lifetime. Abraham listened to that sweet sound and knew he was the luckiest man alive. He'd asked for nothing and received everything. His empty house had become a home. His lonely existence had become a life worth living. And it all started with a little girl brave enough to ask for crumbs, and a man who chose to give her the world instead.